Sorry if I'm a little late. I guess it's not late. Anyhow, today we're going to talk about deploying apps via the web. In general terms, there's two ways to deploy an app. Either it's installed locally or it is not installed, rather, it is accessed through a web application. We talked about the respective advantages and disadvantages. As far as web applications go, the chief advantage is not every client needs Java. In fact, the client doesn't need Java at all, not even the runtime engine. Therefore, anyone can access it that has a browser. And as we know, probably everyone has a browser. And probably everyone has a number of devices that have a browser. So therefore, it makes it pretty easy to access. And there's very few obstacles in someone accessing and running a Java web application. The only disadvantages I would think of is, number one, you have to be connected to the web. Now, today, with today's reliable and fast internet connections, that probably is less of a disadvantage than it was in the past. All right. The other disadvantage is the security issues associated with having something on the web. And if you're storing data, storing it on a web resource where it's possible you could lose that resource, if the company went out of business, for example, you never know. You might have data in a web application that you want, and if the company went out of business, you might not be able to access it anymore. Just again, an extreme hypothetical, but definitely a possibility. All right, I don't expect you to know how these things work, so I'm not going to go over these like in detail if I were teaching you how to write Java web applications. So, you don't have any assignments about them, and you won't be required on the final to write any of these. I do expect you to understand the purposes, the advantages and disadvantages, and understand them on a high level, on an overview level. Generally speaking, there's two ways that you can access that you can create web applications using Java. One of them is JSP, and one of them is JavaServlet. And closely associated with JSP are the idea of beans. There are, as the name Netbeans implies, beans are a way of including Java objects very easily on web pages. So let's talk about beans and JSP first, and then we will get into JavaServlets. The sort of bottom line on this is that all JSP pages sort of get compiled into JavaServlets. We can even find them. I was surprised that you could. Well, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I found the JSP that, or I found the JavaServlet that my JSP was compiled to, and it's kind of interesting. I guess that means that there's really little difference between the two approaches, and it might just be a matter of who's on your programming team, for example, and what your personal preferences are. If, for example, you are working on a team that has a graphic designer that maybe not be well versed in programming, you might want to consider using JSP pages, because they can mock up sort of the general idea of the page in HTML. And then a programmer, someone well-versed in Java, can come in and sort of fill in the dynamic pieces of that page via their Java code. So JSP pages are essentially HTML pages that contain some Java embedded. All right. So let me pull up Netbeans. I have two of these applications. They're very, very simple applications. They're just meant to demonstrate in very general terms how this works. But let's start by running the first one, the JSP one. And then we'll go on to the second one. All this is a HTML document. This is just a static HTML document. So it is an HTML file, but I put my information in. Click register, and it sends it to a JSP page that user details.jsp that goes and essentially spits out what was entered on the form. All right, it's sort of a version of the Hello World application, very simple, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so that's all this JSP does. So what's going to be important is sort of the overall structure of these JSP pages. And as far as the Java programming goes, anything you can do in Java, you can do in these JSP files, or create your own classes which do things, and you can use those classes in your JSP page. All right, so let's look at that. The index.html, we're just going to look at very quickly because I want you to notice a few things. Notice what the names of the text boxes are called. All right, the name is username. The name of password is password, and the name of age is age. That is critical to the use of a bean. All right, these names are going to match the names of the property in the bean. All right, and we'll see how that works in a minute. My bean is details.java. All right, so let's open up this and we'll take a look at what I mean by a bean. This page doesn't use it, but when we look at user details.jsp, we will use it. What does it take for something to be a bean? All right, it takes, first of all, there has to be a no argument constructor. So something you would want to use as a bean, you would have to make sure that there is a no argument constructor. Second thing is that its attributes are private. All right, private, or perhaps what's the other one when you can when it is shared by the subclass? Protected. All right, but you're not going to have public attributes. And that each attribute has a get and set method associated with it. That's a small lie, and I'll come back to correct that lie in a minute. But to start off, these are all going to have get and set methods. And the get and set method are named for the get method, get, the word get, followed by the property name. So in this case, get username. Using the camel case where the G is lowercase and the U is uppercase in the U and username. So the get and set are get username, set username. The gets return the type of whatever the type that username is. So in this case, username is a string, so the return value of the get username is going to be a string. The set accepts a single argument, again, of whatever type the username is, in this case a string, and doesn't return anything. So if you notice, all these attributes, for the three attributes I have get and set methods, and they all follow that naming convention. You know, get username, you know the property's name is username, or vice versa. If the property is password, you know that set and get password are the properties. Now, it is possible that a attribute only has either one or the other, a get or a set method. One may be, for example, that you would never allow, once you need to set a variable in some operation, but you're never going to allow anything to query that and to pull out the value of that. And that one's kind of hard to think of an example of. Like maybe you can set the age of a person, and maybe that age is going to be used in calculations, but you never need to return the age of the person. Again, that's not really a good example, but that's what it means. A write-only property you would have a set for, but no get. And again, therefore you could set it. It could be used in calculations or whatever, but you could not get it. The opposite is probably more common, a read-only property. And that would be, for example, let's say an example in this case, to calculate the number of months this person was, all right? Again, this isn't perfect because I don't have a place to put in, I don't have a place to put in the decimal numbers of a year, like 61 and a half years or whatever. But let's just assume how many months in the years that they were born, where you would take the age and multiply it by 12. And again, that's an approximation, but let's say there is. We wouldn't set that, right? That is derived from the age. But we could get it. We could have our program ask for the number of months, and there would be a get method that would return it. In an example that you guys did, if I was creating a bean for student, all right, the bean would have, in the problems that we did this semester, the beans would have 3 properties. Probably the name or ID number of the student, how many credit hours they were taking, and what their residency status is. So if I call those residency status, name, credit hours, again, those properties would have getters and setters. So there'd be get credit hours, get residency status, get name, and there would be sets. So set name, set residency status, set credit hours, all right? But I could have a read-only property of get tuition, all right? Get tuition would be a read-only property because I can ask the bean what the student's tuition is, all right? But I'm never going to set that variable. You change the student's tuition by changing either their residency status or number of credit hours. But you can access the tuition as though it was a property simply by making a get tuition method. That's why sometimes, I think I even said that in some examples, you could say calculate tuition, or you could just say get tuition, all right? The get tuition is definitely sort of a bean-inspired approach. All right. This, by the way, should sound familiar to you. I hope it sounds familiar to you because that's how I've been encouraging you to have your set up your classes from the first day, all right? Method names using the camel case, attributes private, attributes starting with a lower case letter, get methods, set methods, all right? So this should be a small adjustment or no adjustment if you've taken to heart all the things I've said about how to create classes so far in this class, all right? Okay, so now how is this used? Let's look at the JSP. The idea of a bean is this. We can include the bean on a JSP, and it's easier even for non-programmers to get the information out of the bean. So in other words, the Java programmer, just in a hypothetical case, the Java programmer would write the student class, all right, or the pizza class, or whatever class. The Java programmer would write all the classes that the student class needs, or that the pizza class needs, or whatever, all right? You would include one of them as being, or you include, you could make them beans if you wanted to. You probably would make at least one of them a bean. And then you can easily integrate the beans in a JSP page. And the idea is that someone that wasn't necessarily a programmer would be able to do it. And when we look at the JSP commands for that, you'll see that that's pretty straightforward. So JSP is like this. First of all, I have useBean. This is the equivalent of calling the no argument constructor. So this is the equivalent of for shorthand, not, this would be assuming that up at the top was the God, what's that called? Package. Mine just went blank on that term. This would assume that we included on the page the package to which it belongs. So we import the package, and we can say details user info. This would be, again, this is not on the JSP page. This is if we were doing this in a regular Java class. I'm just showing you what the equivalent of this statement is. So this statement is creating a object named username on the server. Remember, all this code runs on the server, and the only thing to get sent back to the browser is the HTML code that was generated. That's important. Let me run it and show you. So if I type something in, we're to view the source of this. We do not see any Java code. The only thing we see is HTML code, because the client doesn't execute the Java code. The client just returns or just takes the HTML that was returned by the JSP page and displays it. Okay. So remember I told you to pay attention to what these form fields were called. These form fields are called, in our case, username, password, and age, which matched the name of these properties that all have getters and setters. This statement here allows us to set all the properties at once. Because what it will do is it will take all the things in the request that came over to this page. All right, it will take any of the information that came over as part of the form that was submitted, and it will try to do all of them. Now, we can set individual properties if we want, but generally speaking, we want to initialize all the variables that we can, and therefore we would say property star in the name of the bean user info. Again, user info is like the variable name for the bean. So we're saying set all the properties that we can in user info. How does it know what properties it can set? It'll match up the name in the form that was submitted along with these properties, and where there's a match, it will call the appropriate get and set methods. Actually, it doesn't look for the properties. It looks for the set method. So if there's a set something that matches what's in the HTML, it will call that set method. That's nice that we don't have to write out every one, especially if the bean has a lot of properties. So we set all the properties. Now we get all the properties. All right. So this would be the equivalent of writing 3 set statements in our case. User info dot set name, and then pass the name. User info set age. User info dot set password. These are the equivalents of a get, where we say get, we use a Java bean property username. So we're pulling from the bean the property that is named username. So we're calling the get username function. We had a read-only property we could call get tuition in the example that I was giving before. So you can see this is JSP code, but it doesn't look, it's not as daunting as typical Java code is. So even with someone that maybe has a little bit of experience with Java or no experience in Java could be taught how to do these things. I would think could be taught fairly easily to do these things. A bright person would be able to, even if they don't know all the ins and outs of Java. All right. Where the hardcore Java program would come into would be in the creation of the bean and any classes that the bean would use. Now, in this case, because it's a very simple example, I'm only using the bean to take the data in and to spit it out. But we could do tons of other things too. We could have tons of other classes that did calculations of the person's number of months that they live and the likelihood of what their, how many more years they have to live and what their cost of insurance would be based on these parameters and all sorts of things. You could have all these other classes in here and you could call them within the JSP page. The way that you can call JSP code within a JSP page without using a bean is you put these little indicators similar to in other scripting languages. Again, JSP stands for Java Scripting Page. So I can put this in and I put the end in. And then we could do anything in Java. Int x equals 12. Int y equals 12. Int z equals x times y. Then when we want to print it out, we could say out.println and output the value that we've calculated of z. Now, again, this is very simple other Java code. In reality, it would involve creating the classes that were not beans. So this part of it maybe would require sort of a hardcore Java programmer to write any of this embedded Java, the Java that's embedded within a JSP page and not just the bean stuff. So the bean stuff makes it easy to incorporate some data from Java classes, but for other stuff that you would need to do, you might require a Java programmer. And again, there could be a whole number of different classes here, and we could create those classes, create objects of those classes, and so on. So like now when we run this, It displays that, and it displays 144. Notice again, we don't see in the source any of the Java code. We just see the resulting HTML that was outputted. How do you output something? Well, you can output stuff via the bean get, or you can output things just using the out.println. All right, so this is JSP. There's Java code inside of an HTML document, what essentially is an HTML document. It will be in a JSP file, and yeah, that's about it. And the server, of course, has to be configured to handle this. The server has to be written to handle this, and what that would entail is the server being able to understand Java. So, you know, not every web server out of the box would understand Java and JSP page, and so on. But instead, the JSP page, you know, the server would have to be configured to understand that. I'm looking up on my phone something that I don't want to misspeak on. The web server, of course, will have to understand Java, and there are add-ons to the web server to make you understand, to make it understand it, whether you have IIS or are running the Apache server. Again, keep in mind that, you know, there's sort of two parts of the world, or two parts of the web world anyhow. There's Windows and everyone else, all right? And typically, if you're going to be running JSP pages, you could run them on Microsoft's IIS web server, but it's likely that if you were running that, you would probably choose Microsoft's server-side scripting tools. So you could run JSP pages on Microsoft server, but more than likely you would choose Apache, the other popular web server software, and you would use then you know, some add-ins to that to make it available to handle it. For our running of this, we actually have a little development server called Glassfish. All right. Let me tell you, it may look easy, the end results here, but a lot of things have to be configured for this to work properly. So it's not a piece of cake to getting this set up. In my Java 2 class at University of Akron, we write some JSP pages and Java servlets, and we even connect to the database and do that. Well, most of the problems that students have relate to getting everything configured correctly. All right. Make sure that different things are talking to each other. Make sure the Java code is talking to the database. Make sure the web server is configured correctly for us to run these things, and so on. So there are a lot of configuration issues. If I right mouse on the project and go to property, see there's a whole kinds of different properties that we're using. Again, because this is a very simple example, we don't have a lot in it. But in larger examples, there's a lot of properties, and they all have to be right for the project to work together. That's one downside of sort of the component-based applications that we see nowadays, as opposed to the old days where you just had a giant thing that was called your program, and your program did everything or almost everything. is that in this case, half the battle is not just creating components that work, but getting components to talk to each other correctly. And this is definitely a case of that. All right. The other approach we have is with Java Servlets. And in Java Servlets, we do not have any HTML pages. Our HTML is included in our Java class. So let me run this one and show you what this one's like. Oh, no, I'm in the wrong one. We do have an HTML page. But okay, so I stand corrected. I was looking at the wrong one. We also have a Java class in here, a Java servlet, and in that our HTML resides. And we have another class called convert.java. We could have done something similar with the first example, but I wanted to keep it simple. Let me show you how this one works. When we run this example, we get a form. We can type in a temperature, and it tells us that if it's that much in centigrade, it's that much in Fahrenheit. So it's sort of similar to what we had before. We had a HTML file for the form, and we have the Java servlet that processes it. Notice what we get here. We don't get a URL. We get example servlet. That's the name of the servlet. And that is because my server is configured that to understand that if it sees example servlet in the URL, that is to execute the Java code for that servlet. All right. And give it the values that are on the query string. So you're not going to see example servlet.servlet or .jsp or .html. You're just going to see the name of the servlet class that's going to be handling this. And again, there's files that maintain those mappings to say that this servlet name matches to this class. Sort of similar to, actually, no, it isn't. Never mind. So nothing to see in the HTML file, just a basic HTML file. Form. Text field is called centigrade, and a submit button. The action, though, doesn't contain like an HTML or JSP or anything. We're calling the servlet. All right. So that will cause this to run. Let's look at what this is. Now, if JSP pages are Java inside our HTML, Java servlets are Java that contains HTML. So it's the opposite of each other. JSP page is HTML pages that contain Java. Java servlets are Java classes that contain HTML code. First of all, if we're dealing with a servlet, we're going to have all these imports to handle that, along with where my classes are. My classes are in here. We're going to extend HTTP servlet. And the method that gets called in this class is process request. And there's two things with the request, or there's three things, I suppose, with, oh, no, I'm sorry, two things with request. There's a request and there's a response. The request is the data that comes from the browser to the server. The response is what comes from the server back to the client. So if we want to pull values from the query string, that's going to be in the request object because that comes from the client. If we're going to output things to the browser or to the client, we're going to use the response object. So it's important to understand that. All right. The third thing I was thinking of is it throws these exceptions. It's possible to have these exceptions if something was wrong. All right, here's our outputting. We're saying the content type of our response. It wouldn't always have to be an HTML document. It could be an XML document or something else. We're grabbing a pointer to our output pipeline that's going to send data back to the browser. And then we have a try in here that pulls the value from the query string, either the query string or the form collection. And notice here it says request. It's request because it's coming from the client. Get parameter is this looking for a parameter on the query string. And centigrade is the name of the parameter. How do we know it's the name of the parameter? It was the name on the form. So everything that has a name will get sent to the servlet, and the servlets can pull it using the name. Now, keep in mind, you can pass on the query string any string. So we have to convert that to a double. All right. Then I create a new convert object. Now, we could have done something similar to this in the JSP page. We just chose not to. I create my new convert object. I call the convert object's centigrade to Fahrenheit method, pass it the value in centigrade, and then I output this HTML. Out.println, the document type, the HTML tag, the head, the title, the link to CSS. Wherever you see a backslash, it says just treat that. Don't interpret it as a quotation mark, just output whatever is there. So we're writing out the link to the style. We have the head, we have the body, an H1. We pull the paragraph and say the temperature in centigrade, temperature in Fahrenheit, and then we close our HTML tags. Now, if there is an exception, we output danger. All right. So let's run this a few times and make sure that we understand. Out.println is just pretty much like system.out.println, except in this case, instead of sending it to the console, we're sending it to the browser. So we're concatenating a string together that has centigrade equals the value of the value that was put in the text box and ending paragraph. For Fahrenheit, we're outputting the value F that was calculated up here. So let's look at a couple things. Remember that the client sees no Java in this case. All the Java execution happens on the server. And again, in our case, our client is the server. We're accessing the same web pages that the server's running on, but we're definitely performing both those roles, and those roles are separate. So we run this, get the form, I put in a number, click go. I get centigrade equals 0, Fahrenheit equals 32. I go and view the source for this. And you'll see what I get sent to the browser is that HTML code that was sent there. So everything that was part of the out.println gets sent. And it gets sent with a line feed after it. So that is the output of this Java servlet. If we were to run this from the command line, which I don't know if it would be possible to do, but if we were, would see this as the output from our class. Now, what about exceptions? How are exceptions handled? Well, again, if the user didn't put something valid in here, it would fail when we tried to convert it into a double. And it just displays danger. Why does it display danger? Because that's what we do. This guy would throw an exception when we try to convert it to a double, throws an exception. This code down here handles it and outputs the word danger. And we could be more specific if we wanted to. We could concatenate onto it the type of exception it was, or whatever we needed to. And it tells us, all right, what the problem was, a number format exception. Again, in testing, you might want to output the precise error that you're getting. In production, you might not want to output the error that you're getting. Let me see if I could find the servlet. I was happy the other day when I was looking at this and I actually found the servlet that got compiled. I'm looking for the servlet that got created by running the JSP. No, might be mistaken. Yeah, I guess we don't see it. I swear I thought I saw it the other day, but anyhow, just take my word for it. The JSP pages get compiled into those kind of servlets that we just saw. So as far as this class goes, you do not need to be able to write these. You should know JSP is Java in my HTML. JavaServlets are HTML in my Java. And you should understand why deploying something on the web, what the advantages and disadvantages it has with deploying something locally that is installed on every machine that's going to be using it. And we cover those examples and so on. All right, this is the last lecture in this class. There will not be a lecture next week. Next week on Wednesday, your final exam will be enabled and you have a week to take it. Everything has to be in, all assignments, the exam, everything by the end of day, May 11th. If you have questions about any of your assignments that you're still working on, or if you have questions as far as reviewing for the final, please let me know and I'll be glad to answer them for you. All right. If there are no questions, that's it for today. Any questions? All right. It's been a great class. Hope to see some of you hope to see all of you actually in future classes. So take care.